Thank you. Okay, so today we're going to start Module 7. Module 7 is continuing along the web development track, where we are, web development path. We are going into PHP. So let's talk about PHP. The first thing I want to do today is actually compare it to what we already know, which is C, right? So let's talk about some of the similarities and some of the differences between this new language that we're learning, PHP, and the one that we have been using, which is C. What does it mean for a language to be strongly typed? Which of these languages is strongly typed, PHP or C? C. What does that mean? What does it mean for it to be strongly typed? What does that mean to you? Yeah. Sure. Can we get a little? You're definitely heading down the right path. Can we get a little more specific? Yeah. Zeros and so I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with that statement 100%. Yeah. Right. That's exactly right. So when I'm declaring a variable in C, I have to tell it what the type of that variable is, right? I have to say int x equals, and then tell it what the value of x is, right? In a loosely typed language like PHP, I don't have to tell it what the type is. I just say x equals 7, and then it looks at the 7 and says, oh, this is an integer, and it goes about its day. Later on, maybe I decide to change the value of x, and I say x is now equal to a string, hello, right? In PHP, I can do that because the variables don't track their types, right? PHP just kind of figures out the types when it needs to and uses those types appropriately. In C, if I take an integer value, like int x equals 7, and then later on I say x equals hello, it's going to get mad at me. It's going to say, I can't do that. So when I declare a type in C, it's permanent. That thing is going to have that type forever, well, until the end of the program, right? Whichever comes first. And then in PHP, I can change types of variables on the fly. I don't have to tell it what the types are. It just figures it out as it goes. So that's what it means to be a loosely typed language. There are many other examples of loosely typed and strongly typed languages. When we get into Java in a little bit, Java is another strongly typed language. Some of you will be moving on to JavaScript. JavaScript is another example of a loosely typed language. So that is one of the major defining characteristics of languages. Okay, let's talk about loops. How do loops differ in PHP compared to C? Can somebody give me an example of what loops in PHP can do compared to C? So in some ways they're the same, right? If I want to write a for loop that says, for I equals 0, I less than whatever, I plus plus, I can do that in PHP, right? Is that allowed? But there's another kind of loop in PHP that C doesn't really have. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. For each. So how does that work? What is a for each loop? When do we use a for each loop? Yeah. Arrays. Yeah, they come in real handy with arrays. So how does it work then? What do I use the loop for with that array? How does that work? How does that look? We're going to be doing this a little bit later, as a matter of fact. So we've iterated over arrays before, right? We've done that in C. That's not anything new. When we do it in C, there's a very critical piece of information that we have to know. What is that piece of information when we iterate over an array in C? Yeah. Well, we do need to know the index, yeah. So that is one difference. We'll talk about that. If I want to iterate over an array, I give you an array in C, I say visit each element. What do I need to know? Yeah. I have to know how many things are in it. I have to know the size, right? In C, I have to know how big that array is. And there are ways for us to figure that out, or we can just remember the size is as well. But I have to know how big that array is. Is that true with a for each loop? Absolutely not. That's what makes for each loops so convenient. I can give it any array that I want and just say, visit each thing in this array, and it'll do it. It doesn't matter if there's 10 things, it doesn't matter if there's 100 things. I don't even have to know that there are 10 things or 100 things. It's just going to visit each element one at a time. So it's a lot more flexible way of visiting those elements, of processing arrays. What's an associative array? This is something that only exists in, well, not only exists in PHP, but doesn't exist in C, but does exist in PHP, yeah. It's like a dictionary is a great way to describe it. So how does it differ from a normal array? Might be a good comparison, yeah. Exactly, yeah, you can index it with words instead of numbers. It's perhaps even a bit more flexible than that. Words are probably the most common way that they're used with the associative arrays. So the reason that it's called a dictionary, right? When I want to look something up in the dictionary, what do I have to do? I have to know the word first. What's the word that I'm looking up? I plug that into the dictionary, and what does the dictionary give back to me? It gives me back the definition. So I'm using that word as a reference into my structure as opposed to just a number, as opposed to just an index. Same's true for an associative array. It actually kind of mimics something that we saw in C as well, especially if you did pset5. You see the relationship between associative array and another structure that we've seen? Yeah. Hash tables, yeah, exactly. So a hash table has an extra step. I give the hash table a word, and it can use it, but it has to do something else first, right? It has to hash it into a number, and then it uses that number to index into an array. Well, an associative array is very much the same thing. It just eliminates that middle step. I don't have to hash it anymore. I just plug it directly into the array, and it gives me the other thing back out, right? So doing things like hash maps in PHP are significantly easier. In fact, I believe they worked you through a solution to pset5 written in PHP. And you could see that it was much simpler than the corresponding implementation in C. How does memory management work in PHP? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So in C, it's very fine-grained control. If I ever want to grab new memory, then I have to explicitly say, hey, give me some memory for this thing. And then when I'm done with that thing, I have to remember to free it. That was a big topic that we've been working with over the last few problem sets, right? In PHP, is there any concept of malloc? No, absolutely not. Does that mean we're not requesting memory for our stuff? We still need memory, right? Memory is still something that needs to be taken into account. The nice thing about PHP is that it just handles all of that for us. In fact, most modern languages, C is a relatively old language. PHP is a relatively modern language. Most modern languages are going to handle memory management for you. They're not going to expect you to malloc things and free things like C does. So that's a nice feature. You might consider yourself to be spoiled when you're using PHP, since you no longer have to worry about memory leaks, memory management, any of that business. It's all taken care of for you. How does compilation work with PHP? Do I make PHP files? Yeah. Yeah, so there's no compilation at all. It's all interpreted. What does that mean that it's interpreted? What's the definition of interpretation? Does anybody have a grasp of? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's useful to contrast, an interpreted language like PHP with a compiled language like C. With a language like C, I have to run it through the compiler, and the compiler turns that all into ones and zeros for me so that the computer can execute it before I can run the program or do anything with it, right? Whereas PHP, as an interpreted language, you can think of it, it's still doing that, but it's doing it on the fly. So it's looking at this line, deciding how it wants to interpret that line, which is basically converting it into binary, right? Instructions that the computer can understand, and then executing that. What's the disadvantage of interpretation versus compilation? Speed, it's slow, because it has to look at that line and figure out what to do on the fly. Of course, the nice thing about interpretation is I don't have to compile stuff anymore. There's no compilation anymore. It just runs. I just run it, and it goes. So that's kind of the advantage. So, that's kind of the next thing is how do we actually run PHP code? What does that process look like? There's a couple different answers that I would accept. I can do this on the command line, right? But really what I want to focus on for the most part, where PHP is most often used, is within the context of a web page, within web development stuff. So how do I run it on the console? How do I run it on the command line? That's probably the easier one to answer, right? I have a PHP file, I want to run it. What do? I say PHP, and then I give it the file, and it runs it. What if I want to integrate my stuff into a web page? Then what do I have to do? I want to integrate PHP into my web page. What does that look like? Yeah, I have to use those tags, right? They're special tags, those PHP tags. So it's bracket question mark PHP. That indicates that I'm about to give you a chunk of PHP code to be to be executed on this particular website. And that's the most common way that you're going to see PHP run, at least in this class. All right, great. Yeah, so actually this is the question that we just answered. How does PHP interact with HTML? We just drop a PHP tag in there, right? How can we use PHP to handle forms? How does that work? If we compare the forms that we asked you to take a look at for prep work versus the forms that you wrote last week, what's the difference? What's the difference there? This is actually the main focus of today, PHP form handling. How does that work? What changes? So let's talk about the pieces of the form. Are the buttons going to change? Are the checkboxes going to change? That kind of stuff? That's all the same, right? That's all exactly the same. So what changes then? I want to use PHP to process my form. What do? Yeah. Yeah, so the action's going to send me to a PHP file instead of, a HTTP request or something like that. And then that file, what's the kind of stuff that I'm going to see in that file to help me process the form? How do I access the form data within PHP? What does that look like? Yeah, I use those global variables, get and post, exactly. So, which one do I use? Well, it depends on how I set up my form, right? If I decided I wanted my form to use post, then I use the post global variable. If I wanted to use get, then I use the get global variable. Absolutely. And so then this is really the big concept, another big concept actually, I should say, of using PHP on our websites is, how can we use PHP to change the content of a web page? This is something that we're going to spend some time talking about today in detail. How does that work? This allows me to make web pages that are going to look different, right? Each time I go to them. That's a powerful thing. It's a very powerful thing. How does that work? How do I do that? From just like a general perspective, even. Any ideas? Well, I can examine the contents of my form or whatever information I have available to me, and then the stuff that we learned about in C, like if statements, decisions, right, loops, all that stuff, I can do that in PHP to, just deploy the web page that I want based on particular information. Contrast that to the kinds of web pages that we did yesterday, which were pretty static, right? They looked pretty much the same every time we went to them. All right. One final category of review questions before we take a look at some practice problems. What's a session? What is a session? This was at the very end of the prep work. Does anyone have an idea what a session is? Yeah. Sure. So I can access session data across multiple pages. So what does that imply? That implies that something somewhere is following you, right? Remembering you, tracking you, perhaps, across your browsing experiences. Hey. It happens all the time, whether we see it directly or not. Right? How does Facebook keep suggesting, you know, cat products to me? Well, it knows I look at a lot of cat websites. How does it know that? It's tracking my browsing information, right? It's actually, I mean, pay attention. The reason that Facebook shows you the ads that it does, or other websites show you the ads that they do, Amazon is another big, you know, company that does similar things, is they watch what you're looking at. They watch what web pages you go to, and they show you ads based on that information through sessions. Or the alternative, which is a cookie, right? Cookies are relatively the same thing as sessions, but what's the difference? Does anybody know the difference between a session and a cookie? Cookies taste good, sessions don't. Cookies stay on the website that they're used on. Yes. There's another important difference between cookies and sessions, though, in terms of, yeah. I'm sorry? Local, meaning like on my computer, right? Whereas a session, where does a session data live? It lives on the server, yeah. So a session lives on the server. That means whoever is running the website, they keep the data. A cookie lives on your computer, which means that you have control over it to some degree. You can reject it. You can say, no, don't put this on my computer. Or you can also delete them and say, get this crap off my computer, right? That's your prerogative. For sessions, you can't really say that as much. You can't control what somebody else is storing on their server. That's not up to you. But cookies, you have a bit more control over. So, I mean, every website you visit, pretty much every website you visit is using sessions and cookies to some degree. Anytime you have a login to a website, you've got to have some sort of session or something to track that information, right? So we're going to play around with those a little bit today as well. Any kinds of general review sorts of questions before we jump into some exercises? We jump into some coding? Yeah. With the so the question was, if I'm using an associative array, does the key have to be a word? I am actually not 100% certain on this. However, my instinct is to say no, it doesn't have to be a word. I'm fairly confident that you could use other data types as keys as well. There probably are some restrictions on what can be used as keys. I doubt you could use anything as a key, but I also don't think it has to be a word. Numbers, for example, even though we're used to using numbers with arrays as indexes, well, what if I don't want to use 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? What if I want to use like any old random numbers? I could certainly do that with an associative array if I wanted to. Yeah, great question. Any other questions before we do some coding practice? Cool. So today we're going to write some PHP. Today we're going to create we're going to create a PHP website that interacts with a form, does some associative array stuff, right? And also uses some sessions. I hope to cover all of those bases. So let's take a look at what I've got set up for us today. So the first thing I want you to do is to create a form that allows the user to select a country from a box. I'm thinking like actually, I'll show you my completed version of this in just a second. And then I want you to create a PHP file that processes that form, right? Looks at what option they picked, and then just displays the capital of that country. I don't care which countries you use, pick your favorite countries. But I do give you a big hint here. We're going to dive right in and use an associative array right off the bat. So think about how you might use that associative array. What's that associative array going to be used for? Let me show you sort of my finished version of this guy, so you can kind of see what we're going for here. Right, here's my very simple form. I'm not worried about style today, right? We're focused purely on PHP stuff. So CSS is important, but not really today. So it says select a country, and you can see I just picked a few. Like, so pick a country, and then when I click the submit button, it takes me to a page that says the capital of USA is Washington, D.C. This part down here, we're going to do that later, so don't even worry about this right now. That is not your concern at the moment. Right now, I just am looking for this very first line. We'll do this in a little bit. All right, everybody clear on the instructions? I'm going to give you some time to work on this. Talk to your neighbors. It always gets so quiet in here when I ask you guys to work on problems. You can collaborate. You can ask each other questions. You can actually work on this with a partner if you want to. I'd like to hear it get noisy in here. Talk to your neighbors, see if you can figure it out, and we'll go through a solution to this in a few minutes, 5 to 10 minutes. Alrighty, I am just going to go through the first part, making the form, and then maybe I'll give another few minutes to think about how to process the form after we go through that. Let's just get the form set up first, since I did get some questions about what that might look like. So let me switch over here. If you notice on my screen right now, I actually have something from one of the exercises we asked you to do today. This is Hello 0, one of the exercises, just the starter code. And I figure since it creates a form for me, I might as well, try to reuse some of the stuff here to help me do what I want. So I'm going to create a new file and copy this stuff over and modify it to suit my needs. I'll call this file country form. And you could make it an HTML file if you want. We're actually not going to put any PHP into this file. You could also make it a PHP file if you want. It's not going to hurt anything to make it a PHP file if you did. So either way, that should work. I'm going to copy this into that new file that I created and just change some stuff. For example, the title, country selector or something like that. I don't know. For the action, so I don't have a file to process this form yet. That's something that I'm going to have to write as well. That's something that we have to write to complete this exercise. But for now, I can still fill in what I want that file to be called. So I can call it country response.php. Again, this file does not exist. I do not have this file yet. But I'm going to create it eventually, so I'll just leave it like that for now. For the method, it's set to be get right now, and you can actually do this assignment as a get series of get requests if you wanted to, or if you want to do it as a post. It really could go either way, as long as you're consistent about it. I'll go ahead and do it as a post. I think it's a little cleaner to do it as a post. So then for the label here, I'll just say select country, and then how do I get that list of countries that you saw? This guy here. How do I get this? What is that? That's a select tag. I think we saw that last week when we did some of the HTML form stuff. That's just a select tag. So instead of this input type text, I'm going to take this out. And I'm going to say select. Do I need to put anything else in this tag? Does this tag need any attributes or anything? I'm sorry, I heard somebody say it. Name. It needs a name, right? So I'll call it country. And okay, and then how do I start listing out the countries? Option. So I say option, and then do I need to include anything else in the option tag? The value. Yeah, so USA. Oops. And then in between these, I type the actual thing. Although that's not the first one on the list, right? If you go up and look at my list, the first one says pick one, right? That's usually what you see. You see it says pick one, right? So let me go back and actually add that in as the first option. Pick one. And then what value should this have? Well, this isn't any country, so I just called it none, but you can call it whatever you want. And then fill in, just give yourself a few countries. You don't need a ton for this example. Just a few is fine. It helps if you know the capitals of the countries that you list, at least. That's useful, since we are going to have to list the capitals out eventually. I suppose Google is your friend if you don't know the capitals. But I'll just pick a few. Mexico. All right, that's fine. That's fine. USA, Canada, and Mexico. If you want more than that, that's great. This is going to be just fine for us. In terms of our form, do I need anything else? Is there anything missing? Anything you guys think I should add on to this or change? Anything that's unclear? Anything you have questions about what I did? No? All right, let's test it. I don't have this file yet, so the form itself is not going to work. But I can at least look at it, right? I can at least look at the form and make sure it looks right. So let's try it out. I'll save this, and I'll go to the folder where my stuff is. Oops, apparently I don't, oh, I called it countries form. is the directory. All right, so there's the form file that I just created, right? So now I just need to start Apache. So Apache 50 start dot is the way to do that. And oh, it tells me Apache's already running. Has anybody run into this problem before? It tells you Apache's already running. That's actually an easy problem to fix. We just say Apache stop. We tell it to stop. And then we can say Apache start again. And it should start it up for me. And now when I go back to my page here, if I refresh this page now, I'm going to get my new version of the form. It's not going to be the old one, but oh crap, no, wrong. What did I do wrong? Did I name it something weird? What did I do wrong here? Country form. It is .php, right? Country form.php. Ah, there it is. The name of the file is wrong. Country form. There we go. So here, I know it looks exactly the same as the one we just did, but I promise you, this is the new version that we just created, right? And I can tell because if I click the submit button, what's going to happen? I'm going to get a not found because I haven't created the thing to process the form yet. I haven't created that file yet. Has anybody gotten the form processing done, or a couple people? So I was going to give you a couple more minutes to focus on that side of things. In fact, maybe I'll give you a couple of hints to give you a push in the right direction. Let's create that file. What I'm going to call it country response.php. Okay, so this is going to be what's responsible for processing the form, right? So what do I need to do? I need to get whatever country was selected and then somehow display the capital of that country. And I suggested that you use an associative array to help you out with this. What am I going to use that associative array for? Anybody have any ideas about how I'm going to incorporate that in? Yeah. Yeah, so the index, the key, will be a country, and then the value will be the capital of that particular country. So let's do that first, right? Start with my PHP tag, and then I can create that associative array. So how do I do that? How do I create associative array? What do I need to type in first? Any ideas? $, and then the name of whatever it is that I want. So I'll just call it countries. Okay? And then I say equals, and then what comes after the equal sign? Brackets, because I'm creating an array, right? Brackets, square brackets means I'm doing stuff with arrays. And then how do I put the values in? So USA was my first one, right? How do I put in quotes? So I say USA, and then how do I put the capital in? Equal bracket, so it looks like an arrow, right? It looks like an arrow. And then I put the capital in, Washington. First one's down. Yeah, question? Do I need the array keyword before the bracket? Right here, you mean? I don't believe so. I'm sorry? They have parentheses like this? Oh, without the square brackets. Those options may work, but they're not necessary to my knowledge. This should work. This should work for us. Not that the other options won't, I just don't think they're entirely necessary. So I need to add in the other ones. I had Canada, which is Ottawa is the capital of Canada, right? And then Mexico, the capital of Mexico is Mexico City. All right. So there's my associative array. And actually, we're almost done with this first part. I was going to give you more time to work on this, but since we're so close, we might as well just finish it up. So I've got this associative array. What's my next step? What's my next step here? Remember, I want to figure out, I want to, take the country that they gave me and print out the capital of that country. So what's my next step? Nobody? Close my PHP. Am I done writing PHP stuff? I'm not done writing PHP stuff yet, I don't think. I'm sorry? Okay, so the suggestion was I need a loop to iterate through the array. That certainly could work. I don't think it's necessary, though. I think there's a more efficient way. Yeah. I need to get the value from the form. Yeah, I need to get the value from the form. So how do I do that? How do I get that value out of the form that the user set? I'm sorry? Switch, not necessary. Yeah. There we go. So that's what I was looking for. We need to use one of those global variables. We need to use one of those PHP global variables. If I go back to my form, you see the method that I used was post. So if I want to get the information out of the form in this file, then I can do that by accessing the post global variable. Does that make sense? So I can pull the value out and then stash it into another variable if I want to. So let's do that. I'm going to create a variable called country. I'm going to set that equal to, I'm going to use that global variable to pull out the value. So I say post, and then how do I get this back out? How do I get the thing out for the, whatever the name was of this thing, which is country, right? The name of the box, the name of the drop-down box is called country. So inside of this post, I just say country. Now I made a mistake. Anybody see what I did? Yeah. I need the underscore. That seems a little strange. Seems a little strange that underscore is there. But actually, there's a very good reason for it. That underscore is telling us this is a global variable, right? Anytime you see an underscore out in front of a variable name like that, it's an indicator that that's a PHP global variable that you're accessing. So this will get whatever value they gave me, right? This will get whatever value the user gave me. And now the last thing I need to do is just print it out, right? Just display that value. So I can use the print command for that. What do I need to put inside of this to make it work? I want to print the name of the country and the capital. So, I can get it started. The capital of, and now I want to put the name of the country in. How do I put the name of the country in at this spot? I'm sorry? Curly brace, yes. Curly brace, and then what goes inside the curly brace? Country, the name of the variable that has a thing that I want to display, right? Is, and then how do I get the capital? This is maybe the trickiest part. How do I get the capital of that country and put it in at this spot? Curly brace again. So I need to access this associative array. We made this associative array for a reason, right? So I need to pull the value out of this associative array. How do I do that? Oops, I forgot something. I forgot the $sign. Okay. How do I pull the value out of this associative array? What do I do? Square brackets. Then the country, and then just close the square brackets, close the curly brackets, put a period on the end, and I think we're good. Does that make sense, what we just did there? I wanted to take the name of the country, plug it into my associative array, and when I do that, it's going to give me the capital back out, right? It's going to give me the capital back out. Sound good? I'm missing one final little piece before we can test this out. What am I missing? I got to close the PHP tag, so like that. All right, let's give it a shot. I'm going to go back to my form and just do a refresh just to be safe, and I'll pick USA, and I say submit. Ah, cool, capital of USA is Washington, D.C. I ended up with double period because of the D.C. That's a little unfortunate, but I'm not an English teacher, so I'm going to let that slide. I know there probably is an English teacher in here somewhere who's shaking their fist at me right now. Sorry. Any questions about what we've done so far? Questions? Okay. We're not done with this yet. I've got a couple other things I want to do. So the next thing, notice there's an option here, pick one. What happens if I run this through? What happens if I just don't select a country and I run this default value through? What's going to happen when I click this button? Any ideas? Is it going to crash? Is it going to give me a weird message? The capital of none is, can anybody prove that that's wrong? So this is undesirable, right? We don't want this. Another thing to consider is, what if I somehow find my way to this page and I just skip the form entirely, right? What if I just go around the form and come directly here? Does that make sense? So the way that might work is if I copy this address, open up a new tab, and paste it in. I skipped the form, and now I've got even less. The capital of blank is blank, right? So that's even worse. It's even worse. So that's our next task, is to fix this problem. So if they do one of these two things, either they leave the default option selected, or they come around and they don't give us an option at all, the option is just nothing, then I want you to print a message that says, hey, please go back and fill out the form, right? Go back and fill out this form. If they do give me a valid value, then just print out whatever, the capital of such and such is such and such. Take a few minutes. Again, talk to your neighbors, work it out. I'll give you another 5 to 10 to work on this little problem, and then we'll go over the solution. Of course. This one right here, or the form? The form? Here is my form. Let's see if I can not need this anymore. There we go. Okay, let's take a crack at this one. So we have a choice, right, in terms of where we try to tackle this. Am I going to try to tackle this on the PHP side or on the form side or a little both? What do you think? Yeah. PHP side, sure, absolutely. So we've got two things that we're interested in here. One is if they just forget to choose a thing from the drop down. So that's if they, where's my form? Here it is. So if they just leave it like this, right? That's one thing that we have to consider. The other thing is if they don't even fill the form out at all, they just go around the form and go directly to the response page. So let's do them one at a time. Let's do, I don't even really care which one we do first. Let's do the one where they fill in the default value. So instead of, picking a country, they just leave it set as pick one. Let's tackle that one first. How am I going to detect that? What am I going to do to detect that? Yeah. Yeah, so we can use an if statement. Absolutely. We can use an if statement to help us out here. So where should that if statement go? Where should I put that? Here? Here? Sure. All right, let's do it. If country, how do I compare strings in PHP? Equals equals. I can just use double equals. Doesn't that feel awesome? Oh man, that makes me feel so good. To just use double equals to compare strings. If it equals, and then I have to go back to my form and just double check. This is what I want to check for, right? If it equals none. If the country equals none. Then, what are we going to do? What do I want to do if this happens? I just want to print out a message, right? Print out a message that says, please go back and fix the country, right? Something like that. If you wanted to, you could even insert a link back to the form, right? You could put a href equals, the name of the form, and stick that in if you wanted to. So actually, I could do that. Maybe right here, right? A href equals, what's the name of my thing? Country form.php. There is a problem with this, though. Does anybody see the problem with this? The quotes are confusing things a little bit. It thinks these quotes are matching this quote right here. That's not really what we want, right? How do I fix that problem? Single quotes. So where do I use single quotes? So use single quotes here like this. Is that the suggestion? That might actually work. That wasn't the solution I was thinking of, but I think it might actually work. Let's try it and see what happens. I'm up for experiment. Actually, oh, I forgot a semicolon. Let's try it and see if it works. I honestly don't know. Yeah, it worked. Good. Please go back. Yeah, perfect. I can use single quotes if I don't want to have those double quotes cause confusion. I was talking to somebody about this on Piazza. You can actually leave the quotes off of here entirely, and it'll still work. It's not considered best practice to do so, but you certainly can, right? Either way, we got the link in there. That's good. So that solves one problem. But if we go directly to the form, right, we still have this. We still have this problem. This problem has not been fixed yet. So how do we fix this problem? Or actually, hang on. Before we answer that question, what do we want to happen if this problem happens? What do we want the behavior of our web page to be if this scenario happens? What do we want to be seen here instead? The same thing we just did, right? It's the same result. So two different problems, but I want to treat them the same way. So how do I fix this? How do I fix this problem? Yeah. Equals, no. All right. So your suggestion, the first part of your suggestion was to stick an or in there. I love that That's perfect. That's great. Actually, in PHP, you can also do this. It's true. It's true. There is a difference, however. This and this are not the same. They're not equivalent. The difference, does anybody know the difference between the two? So I can use pipe. That's the C way of doing things, right? We use that in C. But in PHP, I can also say the word or. That's okay. And they behave very, very similarly, but there's one important difference between this way and the pipes. Does anybody know? It has to do with order of operations. I believe this one happens later in terms of order of operations. I could be wrong about that. I'd have to actually look it up. But it has to do with order of operations. I'll stick with the pipes, since that's how we know how to do it. All right, sorry for that tangent. So the suggestion then was to check to see if country equals null. Let's try that. Country equals null. Let's try it. Let's try it and see what happens. So I'm going to go back to my form. Actually, no, I want to go back here and refresh. And okay, yeah, it worked. It worked. So that one worked. Why did it work? Because when I pulled it out of the post global variable, there wasn't anything for me to pull, right? It was empty. It was nothing. It was null. So I checked it against null, and it worked. There's another way we could have accomplished this. Can anybody do it a different way? Yeah. Empty, yeah. So there we go. I can use empty. So what do I put inside these parentheses? Country? Is that what you got? Yeah, like this. Yeah, like this. Sure. This will work too. This will work too. So go to the form data, see if they have a value here, right? If they don't, then empty will detect that. It's equivalent. It's equivalent to what we had up here comparing against null. This should also work. And let me prove it to you by copying this address, opening up a new tab, and going to web page. It also works. So that's just an alternative implementation that you can also use, the empty function, right? But either way, we solved our problem. We solved our problem. However, I want to check one more thing before we begin, or before we continue. What if, let's make sure the actual way still works, the normal way, right? Okay, looks like it does. Oops. Yeah, looks like it does. I guess part of me is kind of screaming internally a little bit right now because I really want to see an else wrapped around this. That's just me. Clearly it was still working without it. Yeah, question. Oh, did I miss it? Was it doing what I didn't want it to do and I just missed it? Sorry, let me try it. Oh yeah, it is. I missed it. I was staring right at it. There we go. So I do need the else. You put a what? Exit. Okay, yeah, you could also tell it to just stop. Sure. Absolutely. So yeah, I can't believe that I missed this. Actually, I can't believe that I missed it. That's something that I would do. But in order to fix that problem, I can put an else in here. That's how I solved it. That's how I did it. I just stuck an else in there. If I can't find the country for whatever reason, do it this way. If I can, then do it this way. Okay? Sound good? Any questions? Any questions? Yeah, in the back. Say that one more time. So the first part was, if not is set. So we're going to see is set come up again here pretty soon. But yeah, go ahead. Continue. What was the next part? Check to see if the country is in the array or not. Oh, I see. So plug the value into my associative array and see if it actually gives me something or if it just gives me nothing. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I do think that would be a great solution. The reason I did it this way is because it kind of mirrors the way that you saw David do it in the videos this week. But yeah, absolutely. Nothing wrong with that alternative. And it sounds like it'd probably be a little bit cleaner as well. Any other questions, comments? How much time? Oh, we got 15 minutes. Okay. Since we are kind of running out of time, maybe we could do this last one as a group. So the last option, the last thing that I wanted to do is this. I want to update it so that it remembers which things have been selected in the past, and it prints out a list of all the countries that I've selected in the past, right? So I wanted to remember that I looked at the capital of the United States and tell me that, right? So what am I going to need in order to pull this off? What concept am I going to have to lean on in order to pull this off? I am going to need an array. That's absolutely correct. What else am I going to need to pull this off? A session. I'm going to need some way of remembering what I've done in the past, and sessions do just that for me, right? So I am going to need sessions. I'm also going to need an array. Let's see if we can piece it together. Let's see if we can work through this one as a group to make this one work. How do I put a session? How do I put a session into this? What's the first thing I have to do if I want to use a session? Session start, and that usually just goes right up here at the top. Session underscore start. Okay? So I start my session. Let's think about the behavior of this. If I get this error condition, I've got nothing, I don't have to worry about this part, right? So everything that I'm about to do probably needs to go inside of this else statement, right? So what do we need to do? We need to see if I have any information from their past visits, and if I do, I need to just update that value, and if I don't, then I need to, create a new chunk of information, and either way, I need to store it back in the session. That's kind of the thought process here. So what are we going to do for starters? For starters, well, why don't I see if one of you can answer that for me. What do I want to do to start using these sessions? I want to see if I have any information recorded in my session. How do I do that? How do I see if I have anything recorded in my session from past visits? Nobody? No? Well, it's going to be another if statement, I think. Because either I do have something in my session or I don't. How do I access session information? Maybe that's a little bit of an easier question to start off with. How do I access session information? I use a session global variable, right? I use the session global variable. There's a way for me to check to see if something's inside of that session. You remember what that is? It's the function we were just talking about 2 minutes ago. I'm sorry? ME? Empty. We maybe could use empty. That wasn't the one I was thinking of. Yeah. Is set. Yeah, there we go. If is set, and then I can plug session. And then I need to say brackets. And this is where I have to decide, what's the name of this thing that I want to record. I'll call it visited. Right? If I have a thing called visited, then I'll go ahead and pull that out and store it into a variable. How do I pull it out and store it into a variable? Well, we kind of already did that. It's going to look very similar to this. It's going to look very similar to this line. So what I'm going to do is actually just copy this over and change the values to the things that I need. Visited. And this becomes session, right? So if I already have session information about things that they visited in the past, then pull that information out of the session and store it into a variable called visited. That's what we've done so far. But we do have another thing, so let's look at the other side. If I hit the else, that means this information is not recorded. So if they don't have any information about what they visited in the past, then I need to set up a new version. So what is the type of this? Somebody mentioned it earlier, but what's the type of this going to be? Is it going to be an int? Is it going to be string? Boolean? It does, very much so. Very much so. What am I tracking? I'm tracking the names of countries that they've already selected. So what is that? How do I track? How many of those are there going to be? 1? 10? 100? All of the above? Right? It's going to be something that grows. It starts out with nothing and then keeps growing, 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 the more they use the form, right? So what is that? What structure is that? It's an array. It's an array. So specifically an array of strings. So what are we saying here? If they have an array of stuff that they've already visited, then pull it out. Otherwise, I need to create an array that I can start filling up with stuff. How do I create an array? Just a regular array this time. It doesn't have to be associative. Just a regular old array. How do I do that? $visited equals brackets, semicolon. This is an empty array. An array with nothing in it. And then we're going to start adding stuff to it. Right? So grab the array of stuff if it exists. If it doesn't exist, then just create an empty array. And now that we have our array, the next thing we need to do is what? I want to make sure that every time I select a new country, it remembers that country. So sooner or later, I have to add stuff to this, right? I have to start adding those countries to this array. How do I do that? How do I add a country to this array? Yeah. I could use array push. That's a array push. How does that work? What do I type in here? Array push. The array name, which is visited, and then what else? Anything else? I'm sorry? Yeah, the thing that I want to add to the array, which in this case is the country. So take the country that was just selected and add that to our array, right? Add that to our array. Believe it or not, we're almost done. I can think of 2 final things that we need to do. One thing we need to do is we need to print out the contents of that array, right? The other thing we need to do, well, let's take one step at a time. How do I print out the contents of this array? Let's put a little message. Here are the countries selected so far. And now I want to print out everything that's inside of that array. How am I going to do that? I'm glad you said for each. You could have said just a regular old for, and you probably could have made it work, but I don't want to do it that way. I want to use a for each. I want to use a for each on this guy. So how do I do that? What does a for each loop need to do its job? So the first thing that I put inside this for each loop is what? The array, which is called visited. What's the next thing I put inside of here? As, and then the last thing, I give it a variable name, but I want to be careful. I already have a variable called country, so I don't want to reuse that name. I don't want to reuse that name. So I'll use visited country name, right? And then how do I print it out? What do I put inside this loop to print out the countries? I need a print. I'll spot you that one. Which of these values is going to have the countries that's in the array? Visited country, right? So I can just print out visited country. Oh, shoot. There we go. Good question. Do I need the curly brackets for this? I heard somebody say no. Why not? It's not in quotes. If I'm putting variables inside of quotes, then I need the curly brackets. If I'm not using quotes for anything, then I don't need the curly brackets. Okay? So actually, we're not done yet, but we're at a point where we can see what's going on here, or we can try and test this a little bit. So let's try it out. I'm going to refresh, just get everything back, and then I'll pick one. Okay, so let's take a look and see what we've got. Capital of USA is Washington, D.C. Here's the countries we've selected so far. All right. So, So a couple things here. One is the formatting is just atrocious. It's just awful. That's maybe the easier thing to fix. How do I fix the formatting? How do I spread this out, move stuff to new lines? What am I going to do? How am I going to spread some of this stuff out? I need to use some new lines. So how do I do that in HTML? BR tags, right? So I can use BR tags if I want to. So here, I'll stick a couple of BR tags. And then I'll also stick a couple here as well. Yeah, I know, I could. And then here I'll stick a BR tag as well. All right, let's see if we fix some of that formatting stuff. Looks a little strange. Okay. Submit. All right. So this works. The formatting looks better. This list is a little confusing to me. Canada, France. France isn't even on my list. I think this might be because I was messing around with this before class, and session data is, it's remembering my session data from before. I think that's why that's happening. So I'm going to fix that by changing the name of this to something else, because it's remembering the session data. See, websites are always tracking you, I'm telling you. You need to be a little careful about that stuff. I'm going to change the name of the data as it's recorded in the session, because France wasn't even on my list this time around, and it's, let's try it again and see. All right, cool, better. That was my mistake. That was something that I screwed up. But let's try it again. So I selected USA. If I go back and I select a different country, ideally I would hope to see that it gets added to the list. Oops, sorry. I'm being impatient. I need to wait for it to go. Except it's not. Wakey. Okay. All right, so I got Canada, but what happened to the USA? It didn't remember. It didn't remember the thing that I picked last time. What happened? What am I missing? I'm sorry? A link? There's no problem with me hitting back. The session, remember, is going to follow me across pages. It doesn't matter how I get to those pages. Let's try, let's pick Mexico just to finish it up. Okay, so it's just displaying the most recent thing. It's not remembering anything. It's just displaying the most recent one. So what does that tell you about the way this code is behaving? Is this ever happening? It seems to me that it's not. It seems like it's creating an array and adding the country to it, and then that's as far as it ever gets. So it's, doing it for the most recent one, but it's not actually remembering it. Why not? I'm missing something very important here. I'm sorry? That's not quite the problem. It's not quite the problem. So here I pull stuff out of the session. Do I ever put anything back in? Do I ever put anything into the session? I never store it back. I pull something out of the session, and I add stuff to it, but I never put it back into the session. Does that make sense? I never put it back in there. So how do I do that? How do I put this array back into the session? Well, oops, if I can type correctly, session equals, oh gosh, there we go. I need to put the array back in the session, right? That's what I was missing. It wasn't remembering anything because I was never storing it. I was never storing it back in the session. Let's try this and see if we've made progress. Pick USA. Okay. Pick Canada. Ah, now it's working. Pick USA again. Oh, okay, so now USA is on there twice. Well, that's okay. That's all right. If you don't want to have duplicates in there, there is a way you could make that happen. I don't think we have enough time to go over that right now, but that might be a fun little follow-up to this, to have it eliminate the duplicates. Are there any questions for me to wrap up? Yeah. This code right here? Yeah, sure. Of course, we'll post this online once we're finished as well, as I always do. Any other questions for me before we wrap up? Yes? They're global variables, yeah. So anytime you fire up PHP, anytime you use a PHP script, it creates those for you. They're in memory just like anything else, and it uses them. They're in a separate, those global variables are probably going to be sectioned off from everything else, right? But yeah, I mean, everything's in memory. Everything's in memory one way or another. Great question. Any others? Yes? I'm sorry? No, I changed it to visited to because I screwed up. Because so what happened was I was working on this before class, and I ran it through, and I got the sessions to work, and it was remembering the data that I had from before class, because I was using the same name, so I just changed it. So you can use whatever you want. Yeah, sure. Yeah. As long as these are consistent, it doesn't matter what you call it. You can name it after me. I would be honored. Actually, that's probably a horrible name, because that's not a descriptive name, right? It's not a descriptive name of what it is. But I would still be honored. Any other questions for me? Alrighty, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up. There is a studio for you to work on today that involves multiplication tables, which is going to be actually pretty similar to the exercise that we just did. And then you can also start thinking about PSET 7 once you get that finished up. Let us know if you have any questions. Thanks. Somebody hit the lights for me. Oh, sorry.